Welcome to the deep dive. We've got this fascinating stack of sources, articles, notes, historical accounts, and we're here to really get to the heart of it.
What's like a deep one today?
It really is. We're heading into a very dark, very complex piece of history. The Thuggee cult in India.
Yeah.
And specifically, one figure often linked to it, Thug Behram.
Yeah, this isn't just straightforward crime we're talking about.
No, it's this intricate mix of, well, religious belief, organized crime on a massive scale,
Mm.
and just profound deception.
The scale is something else. And the methods.
Exactly. Ritual, murder, and then there's this twist with Behram himself later on that's quite something.
You look at these sources, and right away, the Thuggee challenge our usual ideas about what motivates criminals, don't they? It wasn't just about money.
That's it. It's the why that feels so alien, so compelling. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So before we get to Behram himself, we kind of need to set the scene, understand the Thuggee world he moved in.
The cult itself.
Exactly. And the sources describe it not as like one single gang, but this huge network spread across India.
Really widespread.
Yeah, and maybe ancient. Some accounts trace them back centuries, maybe even to the 7th century. So deep roots.
Wow, centuries. And membership.
Mm, mm.
It wasn't just random recruitment, was it? I see notes about it being hereditary. Passed down.
Often, yes, passed down through families. But they also had ways in for outsiders. Elaborate initiation rituals, the sources mention.
Ensure loyalty, I guess.
That, and to teach the beliefs, the methods. And these weren't small groups necessarily. Gangs could be dozens, maybe even hundreds strong, working together.
Coordinated operations.
Yeah.
And the core of it all. The sources keep coming back to their devotion to the goddess Kali. How did that work?
Okay, this is absolutely central. They saw themselves as servants of Kali, the goddess of destruction, but also renewal.
So the killings.
Weren't murder in their eyes. They were sacred offerings, demanded by Kali. And in return, they believed she protected them, provided for them.
So it wasn't just about the robbery, though that was obviously part of it. It
Yeah.
was a divine duty.
Pretty much. It reframed the whole act. Killing became sacred within their specific worldview. And that worldview involved a lot of ritual, a lot of looking for omens.
Owens. Like what?
Signs in nature. The sources talk about bird calls, animal sightings. These would tell them if it was an auspicious time, an auspicious place to strike.
So the victims were seen as chosen.
Chosen by Kali, yeah.
Mm.
Which is, a powerful psychological mechanism. It shifts the responsibility. They're just instruments of fate.
Following divine instructions.
Exactly. And there were specific rituals before and after killings, too. Purification, ensuring Kali's favor continued.
And the weapon, the famous one, the rumal.
Ah, yes, the rumal, iconic Thuggee symbol, usually a yellow silk scarf or handkerchief, sometimes weighted.
Yellow for Kali.
Yellow's associated with her, yes. And it was used for silent strangulation from behind.
Silent, efficient. And that connected to one of their rules, didn't it? About not shedding blood.
That's right. The rumal ensured death without bloodshed, which was a key principle for them. It distinguished their method and their whole approach, the modus operandi. The sources call it the art of deception. That's maybe the most chilling part.
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets really dark. How did they actually operate? How did they find victims?
Well, they'd pose as ordinary travelers, merchants, pilgrims, soldiers,
Yeah.
anything to blend in. They joined caravans, travel groups on the roads.
Infiltrate them.
Completely. And then, this is the thing, they'd spend days, sometimes even weeks, traveling with these people, eating with them, talking with them, building trust.
Knowing what they planned to do. The sources say the thug's smile was a death warrant. That's, wow.
It speaks to an incredible level of detachment, manipulation, because during that time, they weren't just being friendly, they were gathering intelligence.
Assessing wealth, numbers, vulnerability.
Exactly, and scouting for the perfect spot. Secluded, ideal for the attack.
Which was called the Jahirni.
The tourney, yes. The execution. It would happen at a prearranged signal, at that auspicious moment they determined. Often at night, in that secluded spot. Swift, simultaneous strangulation.
Simultaneous how?
They had assigned roles. The sources mention stranglers, the ones using the rumal, but also holders to restrain the victim, and gravediggers standing by. Highly organized.
Like a well-oiled machine.
Mhm.
And after the killing.
Looting first. Systematic. Then ritual burial. Sometimes dismembering bodies to speed up decomposition, hide the evidence, special tools for digging. All very methodical.
Leaving no trace.
Yeah.
But they did have rules about who not to kill, right?
Uh-huh.
Besides the no bloodshed rule.
Generally, yes. Women were often spared, though the sources say there were exceptions. Certain craftsmen, too, or people with specific illnesses or disabilities.
So not just random violence. It had its own internal logic. however warped.
Exactly. It was disciplined, almost, you could say, an industrialized form of ritual murder and robbery.
Okay, so that's the chilling backdrop. Now let's focus on this one figure the sources highlight, Thug Behram.
Right, Behram. Often named as a top leader, a jemadar, like a captain running his own gang, his own operations.
And the numbers linked to him, they're just astronomical. Up to 931 victims between 1790 and 1840.
Yeah, that number is out there. But it's really important, like we noted, that figure comes from his own confessions later on to the British.
So possibly exaggerated.
Very possibly. Maybe boasting, maybe trying to increase his value as an informant. We don't know for sure. But look, even if it's only a fraction of that.
It's still huge, easily one of history's most prolific killers. And he operated for decades, like 50 years.
Roughly, yeah. From around 1790 to 1840. Which tells you something about his skill, his cunning, the effectiveness of the network he was part of. He evaded capture for a very long time.
He must have been intelligent, charismatic even, to lead a gang like that for so long, a master planner in his own brutal way.
Absolutely. A seasoned professional in this deadly trade. Which brings us right to the core puzzle, doesn't it? The psychology.
Yeah. How does someone like Behram, how do any of them square this intense religious devotion with mass murder? That's the really fascinating part.
It feels like the fundamental question, doesn't it? How faith and violence can coexist like that.
So what do the sources suggest? How do they see it?
Well, the key seems to be that within their specific thuggy framework, there was no conflict. That divine mandate from Kali. They seem to have believed it, absolutely.
So murder wasn't sin. It was worship.
Essentially, yes. A sacred duty demanded by the goddess. And the loot, that was just a blessing, proof of her favor.
So for Behram, using that rumal,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a moral issue, it was a spiritual act. Like the sources say, an instrument of divine will.
That seems to be the picture painted by the accounts, yes. And if you truly believe that, then conventional guilt, it just doesn't apply in the same way. Your moral compass is entirely recalibrated to Kali's demands.
Imagine that mindset. Killing brings not remorse, but spiritual satisfaction.
A chilling thought, isn't it? And the fatalism we talked about, the omens that reinforces it. The victim was chosen by Kali, not by Behram.
Right, he's just carrying out the divine plan.
Exactly. The chirp of a bird isn't just a sound, it's an order. It removes that personal burden of choice, of responsibility.
And this wasn't a belief system cooked up overnight. For someone like Behram, likely born into it, the indoctrination, the tradition, that must have been incredibly powerful.
Oh, absolutely critical. If you grow up where killing is normalized, presented as this sacred tradition, this way of life, your family's profession, it shapes everything.
Behram's killer blueprint, as one source puts it, wasn't self-designed. It was inherited.
Inherited, taught, reinforced constantly by the community. Think about the rituals, the secret language they had, Ramesses. It was called the shared signs, the intense bonds within the brotherhood.
It creates a sealed world, doesn't it? A powerful in-group identity.
Totally. And questioning the core beliefs, the divine mandate, it would be almost impossible from within that system. It was more than just a gang. It was a fanatical brotherhood, sealed off with its own reality.
So, okay, you've got the divine justification, the fatalism, the deep indoctrination, the group loyalty that seems to explain the devout killer side. But there's also the practical criminal side.
You can't separate them entirely, but yes. You can't ignore the fact that alongside the faith, this was a highly effective, highly profitable criminal enterprise.
And Behram, as a leader, a jemadar, he was managing all that. The deception, the logistics, the attacks, distributing the spoils, that takes a certain kind of pragmatic mind.
Absolutely. So the question becomes, how much was genuine faith driving it, and how much was the faith a convenient, maybe even necessary justification for a life of lucrative crime?
Was Kali's blessing the reason or the excuse? Did the piety make the plunder possible, or maybe even more appealing?
It's a fascinating chicken and egg question, isn't it? Perhaps for someone like Behram, piety and plunder weren't opposites at all. They were just two sides of the same bloodstained coin.
And that ties into the psychology of the deception itself, too. That long con. Living alongside people, sharing food, stories, knowing you're going to kill them. What does that take?
An extraordinary level of emotional detachment, compartmentalization. The sources suggest that despite the outward friendship, victims were likely seen as outsiders, dehumanized as sacrifices for Kali. That makes the betrayal possible within their framework.
That intimate betrayal, built on trust Yeah, maybe that's the most disturbing psychological aspect of their method.
It certainly highlights the depth of the conditioning. Okay, so this whole system, this world, eventually started to collapse.
Right, the British suppression efforts in the 1830s, figures like William Sleeman, using intelligence, informants, arrests, trials.
Exactly. And this is where Barham's story takes that really sharp, psychologically fascinating turn.
Because he got caught.
He got caught. And faced with capture, likely execution. He made a decision that seems to completely contradict everything he supposedly stood for.
The king of the thugs, devotee of Kali, responsible for maybe hundreds of ritual killings,
Yeah.
flips. Becomes an informant. An approver, they called it.
Yeah. Working for the British. Against his own kind. Against his own faith, supposedly.
What happens in a mind like that? When decades of deeply ingrained belief and loyalty crash head-on into the immediate threat of death?
Well, the sources strongly suggest that primal self-preservation kicked in and just overrode everything else. The fear of the noose, right here, right now, became stronger than any fear of Kali's anger later.
So when he betrayed the Thuggee, he wasn't just betraying men, he was betraying his whole belief system, his identity. How do you even rationalize that to yourself?
It's hard to know for sure, but people find ways, don't they? Maybe he told himself the cult was finished anyway. Maybe he figured his old comrades would do the same thing if they were caught. Some sources even hint he might have found a new kind of power.
Power. How?
The power to condemn his former associates, to hold their lives in his hands in a different way.
And what fills the gap? If the faith was real and it collapses, what's left? Cynicism. Emptiness.
It seems, based on the accounts, that for Barham, his whole psychology just kind of rebuilt itself around pure survival. He used his intimate knowledge of the Thuggee network, the gangs, the signs, the methods to save his own skin, giving detailed confessions.
And those confessions, back to the numbers, like the 931, worth remembering the sources, suggest possible exaggeration there.
Definitely. Maybe he was puffing himself up one last time, trying to show how important he'd been, or just trying to make himself indispensable to the British as an informant. It adds another layer of complexity to his final act.
And we also have to keep in mind the context here. Who wrote these accounts? Mostly the British officials involved in the suppression, right?
Largely, yes. Figures like Sleeman recording the confessions of informants like Barham, so there's definitely a colonial lens.
They saw the Thuggee as barbaric, needing suppression as part of a civilizing mission. It was also about extending control. So our understanding is filtered through that perspective.
Absolutely crucial to remember. The sources are what we have, but they come with those inherent biases.
Okay, so let's try to connect the dots. The psychology of Barham and the Thuggee. What are the big takeaways?
Well, I think it shows that the why behind extreme violence isn't always about individual madness like we might think of it today. It can be about collective indoctrination within a really closed, sealed-off worldview.
Barham's mind was shaped by that mixed tradition, faith, whether fully genuine or partly utilitarian, the practical needs of crime, and then, right at the end, pure self-preservation.
It's a powerful example of how belief systems can be twisted or maybe constructed to justify things that seem unimaginable from the outside, and how group pressure, group identity can just suspend normal morality.
And the switch at the end,
Mm-hmm.
from devout killer to informant. It highlights a kind of chilling pragmatism that might have been lurking beneath the religious surface all along.
It really challenges our neat categories of crime, faith, motivation. It shows how flexible, maybe even fragile, human behavior and belief can be under extreme pressure.
So we've taken a deep dive into this dark world, the Thuggee and the mind of Thug Barham. It's a lot to process. Complex history, complex psychology.
Definitely leaves you thinking.
So what does this all mean for you, listening? Here's something to maybe turn over in your mind. If ancient faith could be warped into a justification for systematic murder and betrayal on this scale, what other belief systems, past or present, maybe even ones that seem benign, could hold a similar potential? How do we recognize when belief is being twisted to justify harm before it's too late?
That's a question that unfortunately doesn't just belong to 19th century India.
No, it doesn't. Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.